Kristin, now besides that, sort of individually, Dr. Kristin Sainani is, as I said, a Stanford professor and a science journalist, and she brings statistics and scientific writing to students and audiences worldwide. I think many of you know that. You've probably already encountered her work elsewhere. She teaches a popular Coursera course called Writing in the Sciences. She's going to talk a little bit about ChatGPT and writing today. She also works as a statistician on sports medicine projects. She serves as a statistical or associate editor for lots of academic journals, including Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise. She's written extensively about health, science, and statistics for diverse audiences. She authored a health column for many years in Allure magazine, a well-known beauty magazine. And she, as I said, is also co-hosting with Regina the Normal Curves podcast. Dr. Regina Nuzzo is also an award-winning science journalist and statistics professor at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. She previously served as a senior advisor for statistics communication for the American Statistical Association. And she also currently teaches here at Stanford in the Clinical Informatics Management Master's Program and in many of our Stanford Online programs. Her work has been published in Nature, Scientific American, the New York Times, and in many other places. And in 2014, she was awarded the Excellence in Statistical Reporting Award by the American Statistical Association. So that was a long introduction, but they have a lot of accolades, and it's really wonderful to have them joining us today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to them.
Thanks, Pax. Excited to talk about the uses of ChatGPT. And I wanted to preface this here with something that Regina and I had heard at a recent conference. The speaker was saying that AI was going to reduce people's ability to critically think. And actually, Regina and I think it is just the opposite. AI is going to make critical thinking all that matters because AI is going to replace a lot of rote and algorithmic tasks, which is going to free up thinking time for that higher level critical thinking. And case in point, data analysis. So up until now, up until recently, most of your time actually in a data analysis was spent on coding. You can now use AI to save yourself a lot of time on coding, which means you can spend more time on more important things like thinking about how am I going to check the data? What are the potential biases in the data? And as we're going to show you today, it can help you make data visualization a lot quicker, which means you can really get in, dig in, and understand your data better. So Regina and I think this has a lot of potential for actually improving data analysis. As Pax mentioned, we do have a podcast, Normal Curves Podcast, which you can find at normalcurves.com or wherever you get your podcast episodes. And we do have a current podcast. Our current episode is on ChatGPT, because as we were preparing for this webinar, we had heard about this study at MIT that was making the rounds on the media saying you're going to fry your brain, basically, if you use ChatGPT. So we decided to do a deep dive on that study. Our podcast is about dissecting scientific studies. And it was actually kind of hilarious how bad this paper was. So it does not show that your brain is going to be fried. And if you want to learn some good lessons about how not to do a scientific paper, this is a great episode to listen to. And if you're just trying to learn about clinical research and statistics in general, we do a lot of teaching in a fun way on that podcast.
Kristin, I want to point out to everyone now that there are a lot of LLMs out there, and I use ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, all for different purposes. But for the example that we are talking about in this webinar, you and I used the paid version of ChatGPT. So we had access to stronger models, upgraded features other people may not see depending on their own version. And also a quick note, I think that some people don't realize, in the settings, there is a toggle called Improve the Model for everyone. And if you turn that off, it means your chats will not be used to train future versions of the model. And this is important if you are dealing with sensitive research or if you're dealing with personal health-related information. So just something to keep in mind there. And today we are going to talk about 10 ways that Kristin and I have used AI most for work and a few fun ones for life as well. So Kristin, go ahead and start us off. Oops, sorry, I advanced. Go ahead.
Right, so this first use case is actually kind of amazing. because I've been using ChatGPT for a while now to save me time on coding, statistical analysis coding. But I recently realized that actually you can bypass the code altogether. ChatGPT will do direct data analysis, meaning you can upload a data set into ChatGPT, ask some questions, and it can actually do the data analysis without going through the step of code. Now, I want to be clear that I am not using this yet for my own data analysis for a couple of reasons. So one is I still want the code because for reproducible research, we need to generate that code. I'm also not, as we're going to talk about, ChatGPT does make mistakes, so I'm not going to trust it completely to just analyze the data without me doing a lot of double checks. Also, you have to be careful about uploading any data that's not publicly available or anonymized data, basically de-identified data. But I am finding this direct data analysis super useful for doing quick checks of other people's work when there is open data, publicly available data, along with the paper. So the other day was working on an episode of the podcast. We were doing an episode on misinformation and something called the backfire effect. And I was reading this paper about flu vaccine misinformation. What the authors did was to randomly assign people to either get a correction about a myth to do with the flu vaccine or to be in a control group. And for the most part, if you gave people the correction, that reduced their belief in the misinformation. But the authors made a kind of a big story about this particular subgroup. They found that in people who had high concerns about the vaccine to begin with, if they gave them the corrective information, it actually reduced their intention to vaccinate. It's kind of a backfire. I wasn't sure if this finding was very robust, though. I had a feeling it might be small numbers, so I wanted some more information. In the paper, the authors just presented a model, a regression model. And regression models are great, but the results are modeled, they're fitted data, and you can't see what's happening underneath the hood. So I was looking around in the paper and hoping to find some underlying basic raw numbers. I always like to see those basic numbers. Just like how many people were there in that high concern subgroup? Was it really small? Out of that, how many of them got the intervention? How many of them said they were going to vaccinate? Right, so I wanted some raw numbers, and I was searching around the paper, looking for them, realizing that this was going to take me a long time. So what I did was I uploaded the PDF into ChatGPT, and this is literally my chat. It's not a lot of prompts that I gave ChatGPT, but I was like, hey, can you help me figure out the numbers? And ChatGPT wasn't able to find those numbers either in the paper, so they probably weren't there. But then I realized that the authors had actually provided an open data set. They gave all the data underlying this paper was publicly available. It was in Stata format, though, which Stata is a program that I don't use. So I thought I'll just upload it into ChatGPT, and maybe ChatGPT can find these numbers in the data set. So all I did is upload it. I have the data. Can you give me anything more precise? And I was really floored by what it gave back to me, because without me telling it anything about the data dictionary, how the variables were coded, what the variable names were, it went through the data set and figured that out on its own. Credit to the authors, because they named their variables well, so it was able to piece this out. So it figured out what variable is telling me if they got the correction or not, what variable is telling me if they're in the high concern subgroup or not. And it figured out that the variable on the intention to vaccinate was something called getVax, and that it wasn't a yes-no variable. It was coded on a 6-point scale. People could choose that they were very unlikely to vaccinate, all the way up to a 6, meaning very likely to vaccinate. So this was kind of amazing. And then it spit out some numbers for me, but it went a little further, because it then said, hey, maybe you want me to compare to the control group, and maybe you want me to visualize your data. And I was like, sure, let's go ahead and do that. And it generated an actual bar graph without me telling it that a bar graph would be appropriate for these data. So I was able to immediately see all the data underneath, which is really, really helpful to me as a statistician. So the correction group is in yellow, the control group is in orange, and it showed me the distribution across all of those 6 picks. Most people either pick very likely or very unlikely, and then I could see the difference in the groups. And I asked it then, I wanted to see the actual numbers. So I said, hey, can you add the sample size to each bar? And it added the sample size to each bar, which if I had done this myself, written the code to make this graph and find out all the numbers, that would have taken me hours. This I did in 3 minutes, and I was able to really understand what was going on underneath that model that I showed you earlier. So very cool, I think.
Very, very helpful. Kristin, this next one is a fun one. And I think that's because most of us think of AI as a collaborator, someone who is going to partner, to brainstorm and help us build something. But one of the most surprising ways I've found to use AI is to flip that around. And instead of asking AI to help me, I ask AI to fight me. Basically red team my work to break it, to try to break it before anyone else is able to break it. And this makes me feel more confident because I know that I've rehearsed through all the weaknesses and the tough questions ahead of time. And this idea of adversarial collaboration really goes back decades. It's not a new idea in science. The Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman was one of its champions, and I interviewed him and wrote about it for Nature. But now the great thing is AI gives us a way to do it on demand without needing to go bother your colleagues or your adversaries. It is great. And you can bring all these different devil's advocates, right? Reviewer number 2, we all know this one. But you can go even further. The IRB reviewer who's really concerned about safety and compliance, or a rival PI who questioned the novelty, or a skeptical journalist. So you can start to think about how your work could possibly look in headlines. And each of these is bringing a unique perspective. And you can love these.
Yeah, I love this use and highly recommend before you submit a paper for peer review, take your paper and do this, because it can anticipate some of the criticisms you're going to get from the human reviewers, and then you can have those fixed already.
Yes, yes, this is very, very helpful. For me, the key is really in the prompt. You want to make sure that you have 3 things in your prompt. And the first is a concrete persona. Don't just say, criticize this paper. You need to ask it to take a specific perspective. Pretend you're a journalist, pretend you're an FDA reviewer. You also want to keep it focused, narrow on what you want. This will help the AI agent really focus on what is most important to you instead of trying to guess. And give it an appropriate style. Tell it how to talk. And this will help keep the model from drifting into being too jokey. We've seen this, or being too trivial, or being too snarky. Sometimes it gets kind of mean and snarky. And here's one also thing that I found help: ask for a fixed number. Give me the top 5 criticisms. Otherwise, it can wander. It will start giving you 20 things, and the 20 things are not actually all that important. So as Kristin, you talked about, the most powerful use for a lot of people will be reviewer number 2. But I wanted to show something a little different, how we use this in real life. Kristin, you and I were drafting a podcast episode that is coming out on Monday based on a new study about age gaps in dating, the science behind age gaps. And you and I had talked it through, and we had a good working script. But before we recorded, I wanted to know what would happen if the authors themselves of that paper were listening to us. What would they complain about? So I uploaded the script and the paper and asked ChatGPT this, pretend you are the authors of the study. Give me 3 to 5 criticisms. And it worked. We got 5 specific criticisms. 2 were serious. And I could see how people might think that we had overemphasized or, extended it too far. And 3 were more minor. We didn't address those. But what it did was give us a good roadmap for looking at how we could tighten our language or just anticipate what some of the problems might be. And this was great for our own, but as you said, do it for a manuscript or a grant proposal or a press release or a patient consent form. There are all kinds of different things where you're not just saying, hey, criticize this, but criticize this from a specific point of view.
Yeah, I love that use, Regina. All right, we're going to switch now and just have a little fun and give you some uses that you might use this in real life, or how we're using it in real life. So I think it's great actually for venting frustrations, and you can think of it a little bit like somewhere in between a therapist and a good friend who you'd want to complain to. It's kind of like writing in a journal, but with some feedback. And I'm using this a lot, and I have to say it's amazingly good at helping you to talk through something, come up with be a problem solver or just kind of process emotions. I found it really, really helpful. And for those of you who are old enough, I don't know if people remember Eliza. Do you remember this, Regina?
I do.
When I was a kid, we played with, this is one of the very first computer programs, and it was supposed to be a virtual therapist. It wasn't very good, but it was kind of novel back then and fun to play with as a kid. We've come a long way since then because ChatGPT does a really good job. So I'm taking something from real life, and I actually did have somebody send me a rude email, and I was like pasting it in ChatGPT and saying, help me vent, and like, how do I respond without being mean back or rude back? So you can put a prompt like this in. This one's a little bit generic. You can be more specific, and it kind of helps you talk it through and process your feelings. And I love this one because at the end of it, it said to me, do you want me to give you the snarky friend style response too? And I was like, oh, yes. So it gave me the snarky vent buddy response, like, oh, wow, someone's clearly having a very important administrator moment, which made me laugh and made me feel better about the situation. Regina, this is probably saving you a lot of time because I often complain to you about things, and now I can go complain to ChatGPT.
Right. Instead of me giving you the snarky, ChatGPT can give you all the snarky.
Yes. Yes.
It's a little easier. So my next one is in the, oops, sorry, we are both controlling it. Go ahead. All right. Mine is in the same vein as yours. A little silly, but actually kind of fun. So when you and I were starting the podcast, we needed a little motivation because it was really hard work. And we were wondering, is it really worth it to do all of this? So I asked ChatGPT to create an inspiring cartoon of our podcast becoming successful. And I gave it 2 of our photos and the cover art. And this is what it gave me. And I don't know if everyone can see it. It's a little small, but let's just say this was a little too realistic because it's not inspiring if it looks like your driver's license photo and it's got all your lines in there. And I say, hey, can you make us a little younger, please? Younger than we actually are. And then I gave us something appropriately inspiring, and I like it. So the point is, this was fun. It did it super fast, and it got the text and the graphics right, which it does not always do. And a year ago, I think, even ChatGPT would have gotten this wrong. Yeah, it would have been hard. Now it is quick, clean, and actually motivating. So even silly things can be useful.
Regina, I actually love this use because I like to visualize things. And so I will make cartoons for my students, for my kids sometimes. And going back to like using ChatGPT as a therapist, I sometimes use it to vent. Like I will make a cartoon of a situation, let's say that's a little bit snarky that I might not share with the person I'm making the cartoon about. But yeah, it helps me to process. So I found that really fun, actually. All right, now moving back to the little bit more serious, I want to talk about the use of ChatGPT for writing, because of course, this is what everybody is talking about. English teachers are very concerned about students just using ChatGPT to write. And Regina, my take on it, you can jump in here, is ChatGPT is actually kind of an awful writer de novo, if you're just asking it to write something for you.
I completely agree. And I think one of the reasons it has been trained on some really bad writing out there, hasn't it? It's been trained on the entire scientific, corpus literature out there, and scientists are not always great writers. So it can be verbose. It can use a lot of passive voice. It can wander. Yes.
Yeah, it's just not great for if you just say, hey, write me an essay or write me a paper. You are not going to get something that is well written. Also, the ethics of that we're still working out, really, but I'm not recommending it at all for use as just to write for you. There are some great ways, though, to use ChatGPT to help make your writing faster and to make your writing better. So I'm going to talk about those. My personal favorite use, and what I'm using ChatGPT for the most in terms of my writing, is actually using it for dictation. And what's great about this is it can automatically, immediately, you can talk into ChatGPT. It can give you a transcript, which actually saves you time on having to go to a transcription program. But even better than that, it can lightly clean up your transcript. So you end up with something that is really a starting point for writing. So for those of you who aren't aware, if you go into the little chat window in ChatGPT, there is actually a microphone there. You can press that little microphone button. And I tend to do this on my phone. So I'll get ChatGPT up on my phone, press the microphone button, and then I will talk into ChatGPT. And what it will do is it will create a little audio file. And then you just press, there's a little check mark when you're done. You press the little check mark, and it will automatically transcribe the entire audio file into the ChatGPT window. And then if you press the little submit button, it will submit into ChatGPT. And then you can ask it to do some things with the transcript. For example, lightly clean it up. And I find this is a great way. I love to talk out my writing before I write. So this is a great way to have something down on paper. So when you sit down to write, you're not just dealing with a blank screen, but you already have a lot written out. And so actually, Regina and I have used this quite a bit for the podcast. We like to, when we go in to tape the podcast, have kind of a rough script to work off of. Not an exact script necessarily, but just something where we have all of the information about the studies, the numbers, and everything right in front of us. So when we were preparing the episode on ChatGPT, we sat down at a coffee shop, and this prompt here is me talking into ChatGPT. So I did not type this. I just talked into ChatGPT, said, hey, hi, ChatGPT. I'm going to talk out a script with Regina, and what I want you to do is transcribe it, but lightly clean it up. We don't want you to change words or try to do your own writing on this, but take all the parts where we've repeated ourselves or, we weren't clear, and, turn it into sentences if we've, kind of stuttered. So it says, go ahead. I'm going to do that for you. And then Regina and I sat there for about, 2 hours, and we talked out the podcast episode into ChatGPT. And by the way,
we did not actually talk for 2 hours straight. I do not recommend talking for 2 hours into ChatGPT. We did it in chunks, smaller chunks.
Yeah. Yes. Really good idea to break this up into smaller audio files, because what I have found will happen, and it's happened a few times, Regina, with us, is like your phone will kind of blip off and the audio file can be lost very easily. So, we were doing it about 5-minute chunks. We talk out one section, and then you hit the little check mark. It gives you the direct transcription exactly as is. It's a very good transcriber. And then you have to hit this arrow button to submit it. And so we were talking about, hey, let's talk about the experimental methods. There were 3 groups. And it took all of that and drafted it into this very nice starting script where, again, sentences and all of the details we wanted in there, but cleaned it up. So we weren't, it was not a lot of stuttering. That is a great script for us to go in and be able to talk off of. I also used this trick recently with my son, who is applying for colleges, and getting him to write his college essay, sit down and write that college essay, has been like pulling teeth. I've been trying to get him to do it for months. So what I did finally was I just put ChatGPT on my phone, hit the little microphone button, stuck it in front of his face, and said, okay, talk out what you want to talk about in your personal essay. And that was much easier for him to get going. So he talked it out, and then it lightly cleaned it up, and he had a starting point for his essay. So it was a great motivator for him. The other ways, let me just add, Regina, the other ways I'm using ChatGPT in writing, besides, this is my main use, but another thing you can use it for is brainstorming. So if you're trying to figure out, what is it I'm trying to say? What's the theme of my essay? You can kind of iterate with it and brainstorm. And it's also a really good editor if you give it specific instructions. So you can put part of your manuscript in and say, hey, if I've used a lot of passive voice, can you point that out to me? Can you help me turn it into active voice? Can you make it more concise? Where am I unclear? And it's a really good editor. Yeah.
As you said, it is good for breaking down that writer's block, right? And helping as a partner. The problem is when people are just telling it to do something and using that. Right? That's what we're going to do. Issues, right? Okay, next one, getting away from writing and back to data analysis. So this next use is a little geeky, but it is very powerful, and it's blinded data analysis. And this is a specific problem that it solved. It faces every researcher who needs to do data analysis. When you're analyzing your data, it's very easy to unconsciously nudge your analyses and your answers toward whatever is, quote unquote, the right answer, or the thing that you want to see, or the thing that you expect to see. And p-hacking, post-hoc analyses, researchers have talked about problems with this for decades. It's a problem in reproducibility in science. And one solution is to blind yourself to the real data so you cannot cheat. It's just like when you give patients in a clinical trial, you give them either a placebo or the real drug. So you are giving analysts a fake but realistic data set where you are just shuffling the treatment labels, or you're jittering the numbers slightly, and then you're taking that blinded data set, you're doing all of your cleaning, your data analyses, all on this blinded version. Then you lock your code, and then you apply it only then to the real data. And by doing that, you have proven that you did not unconsciously cheat or put your thumb on the scale.
I love this use, Regina, because you've got all your code written, but there's no temptation to kind of fit the model a little bit more closely. And then, as you said, you lock it in. So then all you got to do is take the real data and apply it. It's a 2-second thing. And then you've got all your answers, but yeah, no temptation there to cheat.
They do this in astrophysics because it's very expensive to gather data, and they don't want the temptation to p-hack things. The problem, though, is that generating a good blinded data set requires real coding chops. Like, it has been very hard, and that has been a barrier for a lot of researchers in here. But this is where AI is so good. ChatGPT is so good. You can literally just tell it, here's my data set. Here are the variables I want you to just add a little bit of noise to, or do whatever. Give me a script that will do the blinding, give me clear comments, make it reproducible, and in seconds, you've got it. You've got a script you can use over and over. So here is a snippet. Here's a prompt. I went all detailed on the prompt because I'm a little bit of a control freak. But as Kristin has pointed out, it does a really good job of reading your mind. So you can just be pretty vague, and it will give you what you need. And this is a little bit of a snippet of what I got back. You can see that it has this reproducible seed. It has an unblinding key, so you can always get back the original. And it jitters things and shuffles things, and everything is clearly labeled in these files. It saves. It's beautiful, really, and transparent, and it makes it really easy. Just wanted to show a little bit to illustrate the idea. The top is the original data. The bottom is the blinded data that ChatGPT gave me, and you can see it just adds a little bit of random noise. So you can't be chasing after some specific signal. Permutes the treatment labels in there, and AI can also help with the code locking too. So it is very, very powerful. So blind data analysis may not be new, but AI lets you actually do it. It lowers that barrier. It used to take hours, and some people couldn't even do it. And I think this is a small trick, but Kristin, can really have a big payoff, because now you can post this and brag about it publicly. You are confident, and other people are confident in you. So I think it's a good bang for your buck on this one.
Oh, I love this use, yeah, because it is such a barrier to take the time to do this. Yeah. But now when you don't have to do the coding yourself, it's so much easier, and it's like, why wouldn't you go ahead and do this extra step? Because it's not costing you 10 hours or a work day. Yes. All right, back to the fun ones for life. So this is for those of you who have kids, or if you have going to have kids someday. I love this use because it's great for homework help. So it does all sorts of things that can be helpful for homework. So for me, my daughter's a very good student, and ever since she was like in, first grade, she would come home when she had a test and say, Mom, I've got a test in social studies. I've got a test in biology. Can you make me a practice test? So back before ChatGPT, what I would do is, take out her textbook. I'd go through it. I would write out by hand these multiple choice, tests for her, fill in the blank. And it would take me a lot of time, but she really appreciated the help. The last few years, I have saved myself a lot of time and a lot of, hand cramping by using ChatGPT. It is amazing for homework help. It creates amazing practice tests in an instant. So I'll just show you one example. So she was taking French over the summer, and she had a French test. So she said, Mom, can you make me up a practice test for French. So I also wanted to illustrate, Regina, I am not as particular or neat in my prompts often when I'm typing into ChatGPT. They can often, I often misspell things, I forget spaces, I don't have right grammar, and it can understand what I'm trying to say, which is great. So this is verbatim the prompt I gave it. I asked for a 40-question practice test, and she was in French 1, so the tests are in French, but they use really simple vocabulary, so I wanted it to mimic that. Specifically, mostly multiple choice, a few fill in the blank to try to make it look exactly like the test she was going to take. And I knew that the lesson, the unit, was about rooms in the house, basic furniture, basic food, and a lot about how to order in a restaurant with specific verbs. So I was able to give it exactly what was on the test. And then it generated this beautiful practice test for me with really simple prompts and easy for her to do. It really mimicked the level, but then she can practice and test herself. And then it gives you an answer key too. So if you don't know French, when my son was taking Spanish, I didn't remember a lot of Spanish. So I would generate practice tests in Spanish and it would give me the answer key because I didn't know all the words. So it looks, the complete the blank, you can give all sorts of nice questions. And then it just saving me so much time on that homework help. Love that.
Kristin, you are a good mom. I saw you doing this by hand before, and I like that it frees us up more time to get some work done together.
Yes, it does free up a lot of time, yes.
Yes, saves a lot of time. So my next use is kind of a personal one, actually. So I am deaf, and I use a cochlear implant to hear. And before I got this, about 10 years ago, I had never really heard birds before at all. And once I got my implant, I really wanted to hear birds. That was my big goal in life. But the problem was that my brain did not know how to make sense of all of the signals that it was getting. And I'd be out there in the forest, and all the birds sounded like this wall of random noise. And I tried to explain this to my audiologist, but I couldn't really communicate what was going on, what my experience was, and what I needed from her to change in the programs in my cochlear implant. So I turned to ChatGPT, and I gave it all of my background and impressions, a little of what Kristin was talking about with this, frustration and venting. I did it in my own words. I'm sitting here listening to what are supposedly red-eyed vireos, but they don't sound like anything. It's just cheep, 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 any random bird. This is ridiculous. And I said, okay, help me translate this into something my audiologist would understand. And I'm going into detail about what I'm experiencing and what my background is, my background with hearing. And what came back, really, it floored me. So it rewrote all of my descriptions, my venting, into clear clinical terms. Here, I think you want to suggest to your audiologist that you tweak your T&M levels and your, 8,000 hertz and frequency, blah, blah, blah. And things that I would not be able to tell my audiologist. And she was impressed enough, I shared this exactly with her, to share it with the implant manufacturer, who said, wow, we are really impressed that ChatGPT can do this. So that was the first thing, right? The translation, taking it to a clinician, translating it into their language. It took all of my frustration, my mess, and made it actionable. And the second cool thing, this was really neat, was personalized coaching. So instead, birders, normal hearing birders have mnemonics. A cardinal sounds like cheer, 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 or the Eastern towhee is drink your tea, but it does not sound like that to me, I guarantee you. And it will never sound that way to me because that is not how cochlear implant technology works. But ChatGPT gave me CI-friendly, cochlear implant-friendly cues. It was like, okay, this may sound like a metallic laser, pew, pew, pew. And I was like, yes, Star Wars lightsaber. That's exactly what I'm hearing. And all of a sudden I had something to work with. So the point is, I know that you guys probably are not needing to learn to hear birds to a cochlear implant, but you can work with this for other health conditions. Vent your frustrations, talk about your experiences in your own language, and then use that to create this clear, structured summary for your clinician that you can bring in their language to your next appointment. So this is not replacing a clinician. This is not asking ChatGPT to diagnose you, nothing like that. But I see this as improving communication. This is what it's good at, is language, and making things more efficient and effective. And I think that makes everyone happy.
Yeah, then you can talk the language of a clinician, which is amazing.
and it's working, I should say. It's working because I can hear birds now. And my audiologist is now writing a research poster on the whole experience.
I love that, Regina, that you're getting your personal use became a research poster. And I can vouch for the fact that you can hear birds really well, because whenever Regina comes over to my house now and we're throwing the ball for my dog Nibbles out in the yard, she'll be like, oh, I can hear this bird, I can hear that bird. And I'm like, what are you hearing? I don't notice all the birds, but yeah, she can identify all the birds in my yard now. So that's really cool. All right, back to uses for work. Another great use is it is a great translator, ChatGPT. It can translate foreign languages, it can translate medical language, it can translate legal language, and one that I'm using it heavily for, it can decode statistical analyses sections. And, you know, Regina and I are both statisticians. You might think that you can't read those sections just because you're not a statistician. If you're not a statistician, we will tell you that it has nothing to do with the fact that you're not a statistician, that you can't read those. They just are terribly written a lot of times.
Often.
I would prefer just to get code. I don't know about you, Regina.
Yeah. Like you said, the math, the model, the code, but somehow
Right.
it doesn't work that way.
I would just give me a piece of code, because translating that to English is hard. And when people do it, they often do it very poorly. And so I do a lot of statistical review. So does Regina. I'm spending a lot of time in the past kind of, you know, underlining, making pictures. What the heck did they do in this statistical analysis? Just trying to decode and guess what the authors are trying to tell me, because unfortunately, they a lot of times don't provide their code or their model. And now what I'm doing is I'm cutting and pasting those badly written statistical analysis sections into ChatGPT and saying, hey, can you help me translate? And I am asking for a translation in math terms. I want to see the model written out. But you don't have to ask for that. You can, if you're just reading a paper and wanting to understand what they did, ask for a translation in plain English. Here's an example of one I used recently. I just said, help me interpret what they did mathematically, including specify the model for me. I'm not quite sure what's going in the model from their words. And also, this one was one where I was even confused about exactly what are they using as their outcome variable. So can you parse that all for me? And it does an amazingly good job at guessing what authors are doing, better than I can do without a lot of time spent on my part. So it defined the outcome. It's like, oh, I know what the outcome is. It's this proportion that was kind of odd. And I was like, oh, okay, I get that now that I see it, but it would have taken me a lot of time to figure out. In an ANOVA model, it's a 2x2 ANOVA. Well, what were the factors in that model? Again, I would have to sit there and really kind of piece it out, because their language, their words weren't really getting it across well. But it figured out, oh, there's a between subjects factor. That's the time period. And then there's the response type. That's the within subjects factor. Putting it into terms that I, as a statistician, can understand. But again, you could have it translate more in English if you wanted. And then it wrote out the model. I love seeing the model, because then I know exactly what they did. And so, you know, for me, again, seeing out that model is really, really helpful. But you don't have to ask for it in mathematical terms. Maybe just asking for it explained, kind of broken down in plain English can be very, very helpful.
Yeah. All right, last one is one of my favorites, actually. And this is how to use AI to kickstart creative thinking. A little like Kristin was talking about kickstarting your writing. This is kickstarting creative thinking about data visualization in particular. And it's really easy when you have numbers and you've got your manuscript and you just drop them into a table. There's no creativity needed for doing tables. But if you have a colleague or a reviewer and they're saying, hey, I want a visual representation of these numbers that you put into a table, that is harder. And especially coding up several different visualization ideas, this can take a lot of time. It's just, you know, working with the details. And of course, this is where AI comes in really handy. It's not to do all of the work for you and replace your judgment, but to get you unstuck and save you time, right? This is something that Kristin and I talk a lot about in this. It's getting you unstuck, getting you started, saving time.
Regina, I admit to being a little bit lazy. So the coding for a data visualization is often, there's the parts of coding that take a long time is cleaning the data, but also those graphs, getting them exactly right where all the little details. And so in the past, what I've done is I tend to create one type of graph. You know, I like box plots with the data points superimposed, and I have the code from a previous study, previous data set for that particular graph with all of those features. And I tend to be a little lazy and just recycle that code and apply it to the new data. This is now allowing me to think outside the box and say, okay, now I don't have to rely on code that I've already written, because I can get 5 ideas and 5 pieces of code for the data visualization. And so it's great for statisticians or just people analyzing their own data to really get you to think outside that box and not be bogged down by the fact that each one of these graphs takes a long time to code.
I think this is also really empowering. I do a lot of stats consulting. So people are not statisticians, maybe they're not great at coding, but they say, okay, ChatGPT, get me started on this. And they can bring me options, and then we talk through this. So here's an example of an actual prompt, giving ChatGPT sensitivity, specificity for 2 tests, and then saying, give some code and give 5 different visualization ideas. And within, just a second, just like, sure, here you go. Always eager to please. Here's what it came up with, and the code. So again, even if these colleagues, these clients I'm working with, even if they can't use the code, they're bringing me the code. There's something that we can work with. If you have the code, then it gives you something to play around with. And it built the data set just from these particular numbers, sensitivity, specificity, calculated the confidence intervals, and generated a bunch of plots. And some of these were really useful. I like this heat map over here that is comparing the 2 tests, or we have this one on the right that's giving us these confidence interval plots. I like this slope plot where it's really highlighting the difference between the 2 tests. Not all of them were great, right? This bar chart on the right is really clunky. I'm not a fan of bar charts. I would not use this, but that's okay. It's giving you a whole menu of options. It's giving you a range of options. It doesn't mean that each one needs to be perfect. And sometimes it gives these really surprising things that you would not think of because it's not constrained by human logic. And here it gave this confidence interval talking about the difference between the 2 tests. So that was kind of a clever option. So I think the idea here, and something that we've been talking about a lot, it's not let AI just design your figure, and just put it in the manuscript as is. It's let AI give you a starting point, and then you can work with the expert or talk to other people or iterate or work with yourself to find the right options and to really optimize from there.
I just find this amazing that it can take data and come up with different ways to analyze it without any instructions. And that just, again, opens your mind creatively to think about different ways that I wouldn't have even thought before of visualizing the data. Plus, I love this because one of my complaints when people analyze data, I think they often fail to visualize their data because it's hard. It takes time to make these plots. Now you can, without much experience in coding at all, you can literally just cut and paste those codes into R and run them. And you don't even have to understand the code. It can generate these figures. And all of a sudden, it opens up the possibility that people will actually be looking more carefully at their data. So again, I think it, could.
Yes. Just to add in that, when we're talking about data visualization, it's a little like writing. You are telling a story in here. And you need to think about what is the story that you want to tell with your data for a specific audience. And what AI can do is save you time coming up with the actual word or coming up with the actual code for this. So you can take a step back and say, what are the pros and cons? What is the story each of these is telling? What story do I want to tell? So you can spend more time on the storytelling and visualization.
All right, I want to leave some time for questions, but just a few quick take-home messages. So Regina and I are both finding that ChatGPT or whatever AI you're using, it can greatly boost productivity and efficiency. I love efficiency, so I love this, that it's saving me time. It's really good at handling rote tasks that in the past you'd have to spend a lot of time on, but didn't involve a heck of a lot of thinking. We can bypass a lot of those tasks now, and the success now depends on that critical thinking piece, asking the right questions. This is a drum I've been beating for years in teaching, is like, I don't care if you can spit back the equation or plug into the equation. I want you to understand what the equation is doing. So it turns out now that's the skill that's going to really matter. As Regina and I talked about, clear prompts can be very, very helpful. I tend to be a little less precise on my prompts, and it still does a pretty good job. But thinking about the different ways to prompt it can be very useful. I iterate a lot, and I think also, Regina, we both iterate a lot. You know, you go back and forth sometimes to get what you want. Sometimes you need to iterate a bit with it. We talked a little bit about, but I want to emphasize, you have to be skeptical. ChatGPT gets things wrong. Sometimes it completely hallucinates. So you want to double check things. You want to fact check. You want to be skeptical. And if it starts to hallucinate, I find sometimes I just need to start an entire new chat. It's a terrible original writer, so don't use it for that. But it is a good editor, and there's lots of ways you can use it to make your writing more efficient, as we talked about. And finally, as we showed, it's valuable for both work, but also for a lot of everyday life uses. And I'm just using it for everything these days. All right, I'm going to hand this back to Pax, and maybe we can get started on questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Regina and Kristin, for this really wonderful presentation. We've a lot of people been asking questions, also sharing some of their experiences, and really loved a lot of the experiences you gave, and said they've used it for similar things. We do have a kind of a range of questions, and I think there are some themes that are emerging. I think the first one may be worth just a simple answer, question answer is, you, as I think you said at the beginning, you did use ChatGPT for most of the examples in this, and it was a paid version. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's correct. Yes, it's the $20 a month version. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Some of this was ChatGPT 4, some was 5.
Okay, great. So some people are just asking about which version, and maybe if we have time, we can talk about other versions you've used if you specialize in one or the other, or use one for certain tasks versus the other. But I think the big question that came out, which obviously is one that you're probably thinking about, is around, and you've already touched on it here, Kristin, is on kind of the safe and ethical use of it. So a lot of the examples you gave were using public data, or using, using things that are already available out there and probably already ChatGPT's been trained on. Any thoughts on, what ethical guidelines should be there, what you're thinking about in terms of how you're talking to your students or your colleagues about using it on, or not using it on non-public data, on, how do you navigate those? How are you thinking about that? And obviously that's a quickly evolving landscape as well.
Kristin, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take this one. This is a really important question. And I think some of it we're just figuring out on the fly with the ethics of all of this. So I am not currently putting non-anonymized data. So I would highly recommend, because of HIPAA rules and stuff, that you don't upload. Even I'm in the private mode, so I'm not sharing my data, but I still, just because we're not exactly sure what's happening, you don't want to take any risks. So I wouldn't put data that has HIPAA sensitive data up into there. You can use anonymized data, de-identified data, or as Regina was showing, you can blind your data set, and that's writing code. You're not uploading your data. And then you can apply that code to your real data set and get this blinded data set, or you can ask ChatGPT to write code to de-identify your data set. And then you could actually upload the data set at that point to get help. I would still have it on the private mode just to be cautious, but I think that would be an okay use. Yeah.
I think, Kristin, you make an excellent point. You can use ChatGPT to help you use ChatGPT, right?
Yes.
To hide the information and
add that extra privacy. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's quick. It's fast. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, and so then maybe following up on that, it just, as you're thinking about it, so you both are, you're professors, you're professional writers, you've taught writing. So how are you thinking about it, that line, in terms of, when does using ChatGPT cross over from augmenting your writing towards, unfair use? And I guess I know that's a blurry line. I can tell you here at Stanford, everyone's trying to figure it out. And I'm sure that's the case all around the world at a lot of schools. What are your thoughts on that? Any ideas?
I think as Yeah. I can get started. This is something that Kristin and I talk about. As Kristin mentioned, it is a bad writer. So it is good for very specific things. I think helping you get started, working, iterating on an outline, or what are the main ideas, or here's a stream of consciousness thought. How might I organize this in an essay or a paper, or give me a framework? You need to write it yourself, and forget ethics for a moment, just because it is a bad writer and these are your words. You need to be responsible for your own words. Writing it, then working on editing back and forth. As Kristin said, it's actually a very good editor if you are very specific on what you are using. Kristin, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all still working out the ethics of it for sure. But as Regina said, at my kids' school, they're very concerned about kids using ChatGPT. But again, my point would be, if you just let ChatGPT write your essay, it's going to be a terrible essay anyway. You have to really interact with it, and it has to be in your own words at the end of the day, or it's not going to be good. Now, I should say there are some writing tasks which I think, you should feel free to use it for. Administrative. I had to write descriptions for what I need my TA to do. I put in a few things and let it write the description. That's an administrative task that I don't care about the writing. Or sometimes for emails, like that kind of stuff, go ahead, right? Because nobody cares about that writing anyway. Yeah, but for writing that you care about and that's important, you've got to put it in your own words at the end of the day. And that will, I think, make it an ethical use as well.
That's wonderful. And I'm sure a lot of these things are being discussed at obviously institutional levels as well,
yep.
right? So, and different journals will have different policies around how to use it for review, how to use it to write. So
also for peer review, yes. Yep.
Peer review. Sometimes I think of AI as a helpful intern that I need to supervise very strongly. So I would never just tell my intern, go ahead, do my peer review, write the paper for me, done. You need to work with it. You need to supervise.
It can be useful for things like, give me a compliment that I can give the authors and things like that. Or Regina and I use it sometimes for the podcast. Can you come up with a joke? It's pretty good at coming up with silly jokes.
The other thing that I like to do is say, go ahead and edit this. This is a little what I learned when I was a journalist. I would sit down with the city desk editor, turn in my draft, and then sit down with him at the newspaper, and he would go line by line and say, okay, this is what I would do to this sentence here, or here's how I'd rearrange it, or here's what I suggest. And that's helpful. That means you are learning from the AI and not just taking it and making it, pretending it's yours.
That's how I learned to write, is by sitting down with an editor. Yeah. Regina, you probably the same. And yeah, it's a great tutor. So again, for help on writing or homework help, it can go back and forth and it can tell you why or what it's picking up that's making your writing unclear. And it can be a great way to learn.
Mm-hmm.
This is wonderful. I guess, so I wanted to remind everyone here again, feel free to continue submitting questions. We're almost out of time, so we probably won't be able to get to everything that is being asked. But I did also want to remind everyone, we have a question in the interface here in your portal to ask you what else you'd like to hear from Regina and Kristin in the future. A lot of you said this session was very helpful. You'd love to hear this session again, or a version of it. And I think building on that, my last question to the two of you is, as we've just discussed, and as you've been discussing, this is still a fairly new technology. We're still learning how to use it. That's one of the value, that's the kind of value of this webinar. If we were to do this again in 2 years, what would be different? What do you think could be different? Or what are some of the, even if you're not predicting what would be different, where do you see the variables being there? What are some of the range of differences that you might see?
Yeah, Pax, I'm thinking a lot about how to use, how to teach this now. How do you teach ChatGPT, but also teach the critical thinking skills at the same time? So I'm grappling with that, and I haven't figured it out yet. So maybe in 2 years, I'll have some better answers to that.
It was interesting. I was just having a conversation with someone about how to use AI to create the guardrails for AI. So right now we need humans to be able to look over things and say, that's not quite right, or, you're doing this wrong. So how can we use AI to bootstrap that up and create those intermediaries and have something self-sustaining? I think that's going to be the next bit, how we have all those modules talking to each other.
I'm hoping to see ChatGPT get integrated into peer review and journals, because I think it can pick up a lot of, like, Regina and I spend a lot of time on statistical sleuthing. I think it can pick up a lot of those errors. So I'm hoping that in 2 years, there'll be some kind of pipeline at journals that's a lot like the plagiarism pipeline they have now, where it's running papers through and picking up some of that low-level statistical problems. It saves Regina and I having to hunt those down later, and could really improve the quality of papers, because bad papers is a thing that Regina and I spend a lot of time talking about. And so I think there's a use case there that could be very valuable.
Thank you both. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Really was a wonderful webinar. We appreciate your time.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for the feedback.